Jim Parsons spent more than 10 years becoming the main star of one of the biggest funny TV shows ever. And yet, the thing that made him leave wasn't a big fight, a money argument, or a problem with ideas. It was a quiet, really sad moment he never saw coming, and it happened during the craziest, hardest summer of his whole life. As the stress from doing plays on Broadway, tight TV filming times, and his own personal sadness all piled up around him, one small moment on the set made him face something much scarier than just being super tired. It was the moment he understood that playing Sheldon Cooper could no longer hide the big truth he had been ignoring for so long. And once he really saw it, he could never go back to pretending. Jim Parsons was always the super dependable guy on the set of The Big Bang Theory. For 11 whole seasons, he came ready every single day, never messed up, and never let the hard work of playing the toughest character slow him down at all. But during the time between season 11 and season 12, everything in his life started falling apart all at once. While millions of fans thought he was having the best life ever, as the highest-paid TV star in the world and the main guy in a show that got almost 18 million people watching every episode, Jim himself was stepping into the toughest emotional time he had ever faced. It wasn't just normal tiredness from work, it was all his big responsibilities crashing into him at the same time, and he couldn't run away from them anymore. By the early part of summer in 2018, Jim was already pulled so tight he felt like he might snap. He had promised to do the Broadway play called The Boys in the Band again in New York, doing 8 full shows every single week, and each show needed him to be totally focused and emotional. Every night he was acting on stage, and every few days he jumped on a plane back to Los Angeles to film The Big Bang Theory, then flew right back to New York to practice more. That crazy schedule was hurting his body, emptying his mind, and just impossible to keep doing forever. And still he kept going because he never let himself take it easy. But while all this mess was happening, something even more heartbreaking was going on at home. Jim and his husband Todd Spiewak had 2 dogs they loved since Jim was 31 years old. Those dogs were like steady family in a life full of scripts, airplanes, and camera times. And now one of them, who was 14 years old, was getting really weak and sick. Jim couldn't just stop everything to stay home with him. He was acting in plays, filming the show, learning new lines, and getting pulled all over the country by things he felt he had to do. But every single day the worry got bigger. What if the dog he had loved for half his life passed away while he was far away on set, acting like somebody else? This was the first big crack, the break that started opening up in parts of his heart he had kept closed for years. And he didn't know yet that the next thing coming would push him even closer to completely falling apart. The day Jim Parsons finally got how much he had been pushed happened during something that was supposed to be just a normal walk in the park. He had just flown back from Los Angeles after more filming. He was worn out from all the flying back and forth, the practice times, and the need to look perfect every night on Broadway. So he took his old dog outside for a quick potty break before rushing to shoot a commercial that everyone had changed their plans around just for his busy schedule. But one look at the dog made him freeze. 14 years of being best buddies were looking back at him now with weakness, mixed-up feelings, and real pain. Jim felt something deep inside him just break. Todd reminded him they had promises to keep, that a whole crew for the commercial had moved their whole day just to fit Jim's impossible schedule. But the second Jim tried to keep walking and act normal, he completely fell apart. He started crying right there, not because work was hard, but because he felt so guilty that he couldn't really be there for the sweet animal who had always given him pure love when his life felt like a non-stop machine. Right then, he saw how much he had lost control of his own days and time. He was acting and performing for everybody else, except the one spot where he really needed to be. The very next day, he and Todd made the super sad choice to let their dog go peacefully at home. But sadness doesn't usually come by itself. Just a few days later, Jim went back to Broadway for another show of The Boys in the Band. In the middle of a normal walk-on part, he felt a sharp, awful snap in his foot. He finished the whole performance anyway, not stopping, not showing he was hurt, not wanting to ruin the night for anyone watching. That was the way a guy acts when he has forgotten how to see his own breaking point. At the hospital, looking at the X-ray pictures, fear came over him like a big wave. His body was breakable, and he had been pushing it way past what was safe. What if the hurt had been so much worse? What if it took away the stage forever, the one place that always felt right to him? Right there, limping out of the emergency room, Jim understood that the way he had been living could not keep going. And soon, an even scarier thought started coming up, the one that would really change his whole world. The hurt foot should have just been a little warning sign, but for Jim Parsons, it turned into something way heavier, like a mirror he could no longer look away from. As he sat by himself after coming home from the hospital with his foot wrapped up and his thoughts going wild, one idea came that scared him more than any pain in his body ever did. It wasn't some spooky feeling. It wasn't crazy worry. It was just remembering. Jim's dad had died very suddenly when he was only 52 years old. Back then, Jim was just 26. Young enough to think life would go on forever, but old enough to know how much it hurts to lose a parent out of nowhere. And now in 2018, looking at the calendar, he finally faced something he had never let himself think about before. By the time season 12 ended, he would be 46, only 6 years younger than the age his dad never got past. The numbers hit him hard, like a strong punch. 6 years. What if that was all the time he had too? What if the next 10 years weren't promised at all? For so long, he had tried to run away from that scary thought by burying himself in more and more work, adding project after project, wearing himself out until he almost broke. But right then, the real truth hit him so clearly and so painfully. If he kept living the same way, the last part of his life might belong to everybody else and not to him at all. He carried that scary idea with him through every play, every plane ride, every table read with the cast. It got louder every time somebody asked him to do one more thing, one more scene, one more job. He used to think he had endless time. Now he wasn't sure he had enough left. And with that big fear came a new, clear feeling he didn't expect. He didn't want to use whatever time he had left doing the same things over and over on the same set, wearing the same funny superhero shirts, saying jokes he already knew perfectly. So when Jim went to Chuck Lorre's house one calm Sunday, he wasn't just there to quit a TV show. He was there to take back his own life. And as he sat down with the guy who helped create Sheldon Cooper, he finally said out loud the truth he had only said quietly to himself before. He needed to let go. Not because he didn't like the character anymore, but because he was so afraid of losing years he might never get to live. What happened next broke the hearts of the whole cast. When Jim Parsons finally sat face to face with Chuck Lorre, it didn't feel like a big victory moment where a famous star takes back his freedom. It felt more like the quiet giving up of someone who had carried something way too heavy for way too long. Chuck listened carefully as Jim told him the real reasons he had kept inside for months: the tiredness, the sadness from losing the dog, the hurt foot, and the scary thoughts about his dad's age. There was no loud fight, no trying to talk him out of it, no deals. Chuck just nodded, because both of them already knew the truth. The Big Bang Theory could not keep going without Sheldon Cooper. Jim wasn't asking for more money. He wasn't asking for fewer days of filming. For the first time in years, what he really wanted was just some empty space, space to breathe, to rest, to try new things without the huge pressure of being the main face of a giant TV hit. Chuck took his decision kindly and quietly, but he also had to say what would happen next. If Jim left, the show would have to end. There was no other way. The next part hurt even more. A few days after talking to Chuck, Jim called the main cast into his dressing room. Johnny Galecki, Kaylee Cuoco, Simon Helberg, Kunal Nayyar, Mayim Bialik, and Melissa Rauch. People he had shared 12 years with. People who felt like family made under bright studio lights. Jim told them the same thing he told Chuck. The room went completely quiet at first, and then the crying started. Johnny said later he felt surprised and hurt, not just because Jim was leaving, but because Jim told the bosses first instead of the cast. After more than 10 years together, Johnny thought they should have heard it from Jim alone first. But as the shock faded, they all started to understand something bigger. Maybe Jim was the only one brave enough to actually say what they had all been feeling inside in their own ways. The show had done everything it could. They felt proud and thankful, but they were also really tired. Even so, the news still felt like losing something important. Kaylee Cuoco posted that she was crying so hard she felt like she was drowning. Mayim Bialik wrote about feeling sad, but also grateful at the same time. Everyone knew their time together had been amazing, but no amazing time can beat time itself forever. And now, the ending had to happen. When the cast finally accepted Jim's choice, the big meaning of it started spreading quietly around the Warner Brothers studio. The writers still had new story ideas written on whiteboards. CBS was ready to say yes to more seasons right away. The number of people watching was stronger than ever, which is really unusual for a funny show going into year 12. But none of that mattered anymore after Jim spoke up. Without Sheldon, there was no main heart to the show, no strong pull to keep all the characters together. And in just a few days, CBS and Warner Brothers had to face the truth. Season 12 would be the very last one. On August 22, 2018, everyone outside found out what the cast had already been crying about. The Big Bang Theory would finish in 2019. Fans felt shocked. News stories right away started guessing it was about money, different ideas, or hidden fights. Some places even said Jim said no to a $50 million deal, and that number got repeated so much it almost felt like a made-up story. But the real story, as Jim explained later, was much simpler and much more about real feelings. There was never a real official offer or a big threat. Talks about seasons 13 and 14 had only just started when he decided. He wasn't saying no to millions of dollars. He was saying no to the idea of giving away the last years of his life to a schedule that had already taken so much from him. As they kept filming, the feeling on set changed. There was still thankfulness, but also a quiet kind of sadness. The actors started really enjoying the small, normal things. Funny moments while practicing, quick looks at each other during filming, late talks in their rooms after work. They weren't just finishing a TV show. They were finishing a whole big part of their lives. For Jim, every scene felt like slowly closing a favorite book he loved, but couldn't change anymore. And even though he worried he might feel sorry later, he also felt a calm he had never felt before. It wasn't just happy to stop. It was happy to pick his own future before life picked it for him. When the big 2-hour final episode aired, 18.5 million people watched it live. Millions more watched it later online. And as Jim said Sheldon's last big speech, thanking his friends for being patient, for what they gave up, and for their love, he wasn't only acting. He was really saying goodbye to the life that had shaped him for 12 long years. But what happened next showed everyone he had chosen the right thing. When The Big Bang Theory finished filming in May 2019, Jim Parsons walked off stage 25 at Warner Brothers not as the highest-paid TV actor anymore, but as a regular man who could finally take a full breath. For the first time in more than 10 years, he woke up with no filming schedule, no play practices, no pressure to be a character whose voice everybody knew like their own. Fans thought he would take a long rest from acting, but Jim didn't hide away. He just turned toward projects that made his heart happy instead of wearing it out. He kept doing the voice for young Sheldon, the show about Sheldon as a kid that became really popular too, and he stayed part of that world until the show ended in 2024. But he didn't have to carry the huge job of being the star of a billion-dollar show anymore. Instead, he tried new kinds of acting. In Ryan Murphy's Netflix show called Hollywood, he played a strong, scary talent agent named Henry Wilson, and his acting was so different from Sheldon that he got an Emmy nomination, and critics said it changed how people saw his career. It showed he didn't leave The Big Bang Theory because he was done with acting. He left because he needed space to try new things and grow. In 2022, Jim was in a movie called Spoiler Alert, where he showed deep feelings in a story about love and someone being very sick, and it reminded people he was always more than just a funny TV guy. At the same time, his work on stage kept getting better. He went back to Broadway in plays like A Man of No Importance, Mother Play, and Our Town in 2024, getting lots of praise for acting that showed real soft feelings instead of just being funny. He became the theater actor he had always loved being deep down. Looking back now, Jim says he never felt sorry about his choice. That terrible moment when he broke down crying during the walk in the park, mixed with the sadness of losing the dog, the hurt foot, being so tired, and thinking about his dad who didn't live past 52, that hard moment ended up saving him. It let him step away before anger, too much tiredness, or something worse made him stop. He didn't leave because he stopped loving the show. He left because he finally started putting himself first. Jim Parsons didn't walk away from one of the biggest funny shows ever because he was full of himself, fighting over pay, or just regular burnout. He walked away because life gave him a painful reminder that time is the one thing even the most famous stars can't buy or change. His choice closed one big chapter, but it also gave him back the freedom he had been giving up for so many years. Now the real question is simple. Do you think Jim made the right choice for himself? If you liked hearing this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep telling you more real Hollywood stories just like this one.